Join us as we descend into the shadows of one of Georgia's most unsettling chronicles. But before we unearth this darkness, I entreat you to mark your presence in the comments below, the place and the precise moment this tale reaches you through the ether. We are curious to learn what corners of the world, and in what hours of encroaching twilight or solemn dawn, these grim histories find their audience. Our story begins in the year 1847, when the Caldwell estate loomed over the vast white sea of cotton fields in Wilks County, Georgia. The great plantation house, with its stark, imposing white columns and shadowed porch, was hailed as the jewel of the region, perched upon a gentle rise that surveyed nearly 800 acres of dominion. The Caldwell name was a whispered currency in local society, valued not merely for their immense fortune, but for the twin daughters who had become the very soul of hushed and curious gossip throughout the county. Elizabeth and Catherine Caldwell, mirror images of one another, identical down to the faint, curious birthmark that graced the arch of their right eyebrows, had seen their 22nd spring that year, an age far beyond that when women of their standing were expected to be settled as wives and mothers. Yet, what few outside the plantation's borders perceived was the decay festering behind the perfect facade of southern gentility. A chain of events had been forged in shadow, destined to unravel the very tapestry of the Caldwell legacy. According to county records, unearthed during a courthouse renovation in 1952, the twins' mother had perished in the very act of giving them life, leaving their father, Thomas Caldwell, to preside over their upbringing in solitude. Thomas had never taken another wife, dedicating his existence to his daughters and the ceaseless expansion of his cotton empire. The first tremor of the coming storm, the first hint that all was not well within the Caldwell domain, arrived not as a shout, but as a whisper sealed within a letter penned by the family's long-serving housekeeper, Margaret Sullivan, to her sister in Savannah. This correspondence, dated April 8, 1847, spoke of a troubling change, noting that the young misses have taken to spending strange and lengthy hours in the quarters, a circumstance which the master seems unnervingly unconcerned about. This fragile missive would lie dormant for generations, discovered at last, tucked within the holy pages of a family Bible, a silent testament pressed between its leaves for more than a century. The quarters to which Margaret alluded were the slave dwellings, a somber collection of crude wooden cabins, set a deliberate half-mile from the great house, secreted away behind a brooding grove of ancient oak trees that shielded them entirely from sight. By the ledgers of the time, the Caldwell plantation held dominion over approximately 70 enslaved souls, a figure considered modest when measured against neighboring estates, yet more than sufficient to till the soil and serve the grand household. And among this captive populace were two men, two fates intertwined, who would soon stand at the very heart of the darkness to come. Within the brittle pages of plantation records, now resting in the Georgia Historical Society archives, their names are inscribed simply as Samuel and Elijah. A footnote marks their acquisition in 1842, purchased from a failing plantation in South Carolina that had succumbed to financial ruin. But what set Samuel and Elijah apart, according to chronicles pieced together years later by the local historian William Hartwell, was a secret and dangerous gift. Their literacy. Both men had been taught the arts of reading and writing by their former master's children, a perilous knowledge they had taken great pains to conceal upon their arrival at the Caldwell plantation. This concealment, however, was shattered when Catherine Caldwell happened upon Samuel in the dim light of the stables late one evening in the autumn of 1846. poring over the words of a discarded newspaper. Yet, instead of raising the alarm over this forbidden activity, Catherine, as confessed in a personal diary unearthed in 1964 from the very ruins of the old plantation house, had begun to steal away for secret congress with Samuel. Her entries from this period descend into a cryptic script filled with veiled references to shadowed pacts and a shared understanding. Simultaneously, the cold ledgers of the estate note Samuel's transfer from the open fields to the confines of the stables, a post that brought him perilously close to the great house. Yet, what the official chronicles failed to illuminate, a truth carried only on the whispers of local lore, is that Elizabeth, too, had forged a bond with Elijah, a man whose domain was the sprawling, manicured gardens of the estate. This haunting symmetry of affections, of twin sisters entwined in unspeakable alliances with two men in bondage, casts an unnatural and disturbing pattern. One, a local gazette would later brand as a peculiar mirroring of forbidden affections. The winter of 1846 to 1847 fell upon Georgia with an unusual cruelty, a bitter frost that savaged the cotton stores and wrapped the plantation in a suffocating cloak of isolation as the roads became impassable phantoms. It was within this frozen, silent world that these dangerous liaisons reputedly festered and grew. A letter, penned by Thomas Caldwell to his brother in Charleston and dated January the 23rd, 1847, betrays his unease, speaking of a strange melancholy that had claimed Elizabeth, while Catherine burned with an almost feverish animation. "I fear the isolation of this winter," he wrote, "has affected their temperaments in opposite ways." But what the patriarch failed to perceive was not the chill of winter seeping into their souls, but the heat of a perilous game they were playing, a deadly gambit of secrets and prescribed passions that defied every sacred law of their time and station. The spectre of discovery was a grim one, promising untold horrors, not only for the men who faced the final, brutal judgment, but for the Caldwell name itself, which would be forever stained by the scandal. The first tangible proof of these spectral affections materialized in a series of cryptic missives found pressed like dried flowers between the fragile pages of Elizabeth's personal volume of poetry. These scraps, dated throughout the month of February, 1847, contained the architecture of their secret world arrangements for trysts and whispered words of devotion. One particularly revealing note reads, "The usual place at midnight. The moon will be new." Offering cover, he says C and S will join, four hearts beating as two. This chilling phrase suggests the twins were not merely aware of each other's secret attachments, but were active architects of their shared deception. Adding a dark layer of collusion to the unraveling tragedy, it seems they moved not as individuals, but as one, a shadowy konfederacji, their identical faces a potential weapon of misdirection against any watchful eye. The fragile charade was shattered on March the 15th, 1847, when Thomas Caldwell, over the evening meal, delivered his decree. He had arranged marriages for both his daughters to the scions of prominent plantation clans in the neighboring counties. According to the diary of Catherine, this pronouncement was received with a mask of composure, though she wrote, "Beneath my smile, my heart turned to stone." Of Elizabeth's reaction, the record is silent, a void that would soon be filled with tragedy. For all signs suggest she shared her sister's silent rebellion. A mere 3 days after this fateful proclamation, in the dead of night, on March the 18th, an event transpired that would irrevocably alter the destiny of the Caldwell house. From the shadowed annals of the Caldwell family, it is told that the plantation's overseer, James Whitaker, was roused from his slumber by a sound he would later recount in a sworn deposition as a commotion unlike any he had ever heard before. Drawn toward the disturbance, he discovered a nascent blaze had been kindled in a storage house, perilously close to the quarters of the enslaved. While the fire itself was swiftly vanquished, causing scant material ruin, the chaos that bloomed in its wake unmasked a far graver terror. Samuel, Elijah, and the Caldwell twins, Elizabeth and Catherine, had vanished into the night. A frantic search was at once mounted, with word sent to neighboring estates and search parties, sent coursing down every path and darkened lane that snaked away from the Caldwell lands. The first dreadful suspicion, inscribed in Whitaker's own journal, was that the men held in bondage had fled and, in a display of audacious defiance, had spirited away the Caldwell daughters. A handsome sum was pledged for their capture, and the affair swiftly swelled into one of the most desperate pursuits in the county's troubled history. Thomas Caldwell, by all accounts, was transformed into a man possessed by a spectral torment. Forgoing sustenance and sleep as the fruitless search wore on, what the hunters did not know, a secret that would lie dormant for years, was that the fire was a ruse, a deliberate act of misdirection orchestrated by Elizabeth herself. This chilling detail would not surface until 1868, when a former house servant named Ruth offered her testimony to a northern journalist chronicling the lost stories of the antebellum South. According to Ruth's haunted recollection, Elizabeth had whispered her desperate secrets into her keeping mere hours before the flames, binding her to a solemn, fearful vow of silence. The hunt raged on for weeks, its tendrils reaching into neighboring counties, and then, phantom-like, across state lines. All the while, the life force of Thomas Caldwell began to wither. Plantation ledgers reveal that by April, he had become a prisoner of his own bedchamber. His only companions, the shadows, his loyal house servant, and a physician from Augusta, who was summoned to the decaying estate 2 times during this bleak period. Then, on the 2nd day of May, 1847, a fateful letter arrived at the Caldwell plantation. The contents of this letter remained shrouded in mystery, lost to any public record, but its effect was as sudden as it was devastating. Thomas Caldwell, upon reading its contents, suffered what his physician termed a violent paroxysm of rage, followed by a final, shuddering collapse from which he would never rise. He lingered for 3 days before succumbing. The cause of death listed simply as apoplexy, a term of the era for the thunderclap that silences the mind. Following the patriarch's demise, the mantle of the plantation fell upon his brother, Edward Caldwell, who journeyed from Charleston to take up the grim stewardship of the estate. It was during Edward's somber inventory of the plantation's affairs that a most unsettling discovery was unearthed within the sanctuary of Thomas's private study. There, tucked away, was a small wooden box, and within it, what appeared to be marriage certificates. These documents, fashioned with a crude hand but bearing signatures that claimed to sanctify the union of Elizabeth Caldwell to Elijah, and Catherine Caldwell to Samuel. On the 17th night of March, 1847, and alongside these forbidden testaments lay a letter, penned in what appeared to be Catherine's own hand, confessing that the twins had fallen in love with the 2 men, a love that defied all station and law. Knowing their father's wrath would be absolute, they had conspired to flee into the unknown, together. The missive spoke of how they had been secretly plotting for months, of small treasures secreted away in preparation for a perilous journey northward, to states where their union, if not celebrated, might at least endure beyond the immediate threat of capture and cruel separation. Yet, what truly chilled Edward to the bone was not the confession itself. A chilling revelation: his nieces were not taken, but had fled of their own accord, casting aside their gilded cage of privilege, their esteemed station, the weight of their family name, and the very fabric of their world, all for what Catherine's hand penned as the only true happiness we have ever known. The missive concluded with a desperate plea for their father's understanding and forgiveness. A mercy they themselves conceded was a faint and distant hope. After conferring with men of law and leveraging the family's influence, Edward Caldwell made a fateful decision, one that would entomb the truth for generations. The evidence was to be buried. The certificates and the damning letter were consigned once more to their dark casket. Sealed from the light to the world, he clung to the grim narrative: his nieces, abducted, perhaps even dispatched by fugitives from bondage. The hunt persisted, no longer for the living, but for the cold remains of the lost girls. This carefully constructed lie held fast for nearly 2 decades, until a tremor in the year 1865 threatened to shatter the silence. In the ashes of the Civil War, with the old order crumbling and its people set free, a mysterious woman appeared at the gates of the decaying Caldwell estate, a mere shadow of its former grandeur. The plantation was now struggling to survive in the harsh new world. This stranger gave her name as Margaret Johnson, yet her features bore an uncanny echo of the long-vanished Caldwell twins. Her request was for an audience with Edward Caldwell, the man who still presided over the family's diminished holdings. Whispers from the household staff who bore witness that fateful day tell of a meeting that stretched for hours, punctuated by agitated voices that bled through the heavy, closed doors of the study. When the mysterious Margaret Johnson finally departed, Edward Caldwell emerged, a man visibly shattered. He offered no word of explanation, but his actions screamed of desperation, as he immediately began to dismantle what was left of his inheritance. Within 6 months, the plantation was sold, and Edward retreated to Charleston, living as a recluse until death claimed him in 1871. The secret of that meeting remained locked away until 1958. When a cache of letters, bequeathed to the Georgia Historical Society by Edward's own granddaughter, finally saw the light. Buried within was a confession, a detailed account of the encounter, penned by Edward to his wife the very next day. His letter confirmed the haunting truth: Margaret Johnson was none other than Catherine Caldwell, now bearing the surname of her husband, Samuel, who had adopted the name Samuel Johnson in the wake of their flight. Catherine's story unfolded, revealing that she, Elizabeth, Elijah, and Samuel had found sanctuary in Philadelphia, hidden within a community of free people and fervent abolitionists who spirited them into new identities. Elizabeth and Elijah, now known as the Davises, had journeyed even further north, to the city of Boston, where Elijah plied his trade as a carpenter. Meanwhile, Samuel, with his innate gift for horsemanship, had built a modest but thriving livery stable, while Catherine's needle earned her keep as a seamstress. Their lives had borne fruit. They had children, 3 for Catherine and Samuel, and 2 for Elizabeth and Elijah, all of them raised in blissful ignorance of the shadowed legacy of their mother's true lineage. Catherine had only ventured back into the lion's den upon learning that her uncle now presided over the ruins of the plantation, driven by a hope to reclaim precious mementos of her mother, abandoned in the haste of their flight. But her purpose was twofold. More profoundly, she came to unearth the lie and declare to history that she and her sister were not helpless victims of fate. but the architects of their own destiny, a radical, perilous choice to follow their hearts into the great unknown. Impenetrable walls of societal law and judgment. Edward, however, denied her plea, his refusal etched in ink, explaining that he could not bear to unleash the truth, for the stain it would cast upon their name, and upon the hallowed memory of his own brother, was a horror too profound to even contemplate. Instead, he offered Catherine a fortune in gold, a gilded price for her continued silence and a solemn vow to vanish from George's soil forever. Whether Catherine accepted this devil's bargain is a secret Edward's letter does not keep, but the cold, hard facts of history whisper that one Margaret Johnson purchased passage to Philadelphia the very next day, never to set foot in Georgia again. And so, the Caldwell family's haunting tale of a tragic abduction and the presumed demise of the twins became the unassailable truth. Then, in 1883, a ravenous fire consumed the Wilks County courthouse, devouring countless records from the antebellum era. This inferno cast yet another layer of shadow upon the already murky depths of the Caldwell affair. As the century turned, the tragedy had warped into a local ghost story, embroidered with fanciful additions and whispers of the supernatural, masking what was, at its heart, a profoundly human saga of forbidden love and desperate gambles. The truth would lie dormant until 1964, when the ghosts of the past were stirred during the demolition of the old Caldwell plantation house. It was then that Catherine's diary was unearthed, hidden away in a secret hollow carved into the wall of her former bedchamber. This slender volume, chronicling the time from January 1846 to March 1847, offered the first, chillingly immediate account of those fateful events, penned by a hand that had lived them. Within its pages, a complex tapestry of relationships began to unravel between the sisters and the enslaved men. Catherine wrote of her initial astonishment at discovering Samuel's literacy, a shock that soon gave way to a deep curiosity, then a true meeting of minds, and finally, a love that defied all convention. She chronicled their hushed conversations on philosophy, faith, and the very meaning of freedom, talks that shattered her perception of the world and her own place within it. Particularly haunting were her confessions of the moral torment she endured, as she came to see the undeniable, fundamental humanity in a man whom her world had decreed was mere property. "I have been blind," she scrawled on the 12th of November, 1846, "not only to the suffering that surrounds me, but to the very soul of what it is to be human. He has opened my eyes, and now I find I cannot shut them again." Though the brightness of this truth is often a searing pain, the diary also confirmed the sisters' shared secret, their mutual awareness and unspoken support for one another's clandestine affections. Catherine recounted, whispered, late-night confessions with Elizabeth, sharing their deepest fears and most fragile hopes. As their desperate plan for escape slowly took shape, the final, chilling entry, dated the 16th of March, 1847, reads with stark finality, "Tomorrow, we abandon all that we have ever known for a future veiled in shadow. We may find our freedom or our graves, but either fate is a mercy compared to living this lie." The diary's discovery was like a key turning in a long, locked door, prompting a resurgence of interest in the chilling case among historians of the antebellum South. Diligent research throughout the 1960s began to unearth more fragments of the shattered truth, including shipping manifests that chronicled passage for 4 souls from Savannah to Philadelphia in the waning days of March 1847, under the assumed names of Johnson and Davis. Census ledgers from Philadelphia, dated 1850, confirmed the presence of a Samuel and Catherine Johnson, their heritage noted, residing in a predominantly black neighborhood with two young children in their care. In a similar vein, Boston's archives revealed an Elijah and Elizabeth Davis with one child, a child, also recorded in the cold parlance of the time as mulatto. Yet, the most startling revelation was to emerge from the mists of time in 1968, when a descendant of Elizabeth and Elijah Davis made contact with researchers, drawn forth by the reawakened whispers surrounding the long-dormant case. This descendant, a professor at a New England university, was the keeper of a hidden trove, a collection of letters that had passed between the twin sisters throughout the turbulent 1850s and 60s. These fragile pages painted a haunting portrait of two women who, despite the monumental sacrifices they had made, had discovered a quiet fulfillment in their self-authored lives. They wrote of their children, their labors, and their unceasing quest for knowledge, and their clandestine involvement in the abolitionist cause. A constant thread of fear also wove through the pages, a dread of discovery, a terror that sharpened after the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, which cast a longer, more menacing shadow over everyone, ensnared in their secret. The most soul-bearing of these epistles, dated the 4th of July, 1865, just after the Civil War's bloody conclusion, captured Catherine's profound reflection on their odyssey. Today marks not only the independence of this nation, she penned, but at long last, our own true freedom. For 18 years, we have dwelled in the shadows, forever glancing over our shoulders. Now, though many trials remain, we may at last step into the light. And yet, I find my thoughts drifting to Father, wondering if in some other realm he might finally comprehend the choice we were forced to make. I must believe that, freed from the worldly constraints that shaped him, he might, by 1969, a sufficient weight of evidence had been unearthed to profoundly alter the historical understanding of what had been grimly termed the Caldwell twins incident. What had long been characterized as a violent abduction and presumed murder was unveiled as something infinitely more complex, a calculated and deliberate rejection of the suffocating social order by two young women who chose love and moral principle over the gilded cage of privilege and safety. The descendants of the Caldwell twins, now scattered like seeds across the northern United States, have largely chosen to remain veiled in privacy, with only a select few consenting to brief interviews with historians. These conversations, conducted primarily during the 1970s, uncovered family histories raised on carefully edited, half-true versions of their own ancestry, typically told that their great-grandmothers were simply northern women who had married men of mixed-race heritage. The staggering, complete truth that these matriarchs were the daughters of a Georgia plantation owner who had fallen in love with enslaved men upon their own father's lands, engineered their own disappearance, and fled north to forge new lives, was a secret often kept buried until adulthood, if it was ever unearthed at all. Some descendants expressed a profound pride in their ancestors' courage, while others grappled with the tangled moral legacy of a family history steeped in both the darkness of slave ownership and the light of resistance. The grounds of the former Caldwell plantation have long since been carved up and built over, with scarce a trace remaining to mark the site of these spectral events. A modest historical marker, erected in 1972 at the crossroads nearest to where the great house once loomed, makes but a fleeting reference to the historically significant Caldwell family plantation, offering no hint of the twins or their extraordinary, ghostly tale. Local sentiment toward this buried story has evolved over the decades, From the first tremors of shock and denial to a more nuanced recognition of its significance as a rare, documented case of white Southern women who actively cast off and escaped the very slave society in which they were raised. Scholarly interest in the affair has since festered, its grim fascination growing among scholars who delve into the shadowed history of bondage and the forbidden unions forged across the color line in the age before the war. Yet, the most chilling aspect of the Caldwell sisters' saga is its power to shatter the polished, simplistic veneer of the Old South. It exhumes the possibility of a conscience stirring to life, even within the souls of those who reaped the greatest rewards from that corrupt and gilded hierarchy. It testifies to how bonds of the heart could, at times, defy the cold, unyielding barriers of caste and blood, while whispering a constant, chilling reminder of the peril that awaited such trespasses. Within the brittle pages of Catherine's diary, a spectral voice confesse, we were not given the choice to enter this world of master and thrall, but the choice remains ours, to bow to its decrees. And in their fateful decision, the Caldwell sisters bequeathed a legacy that echoes, still a haunting testament to the notion that even in the most profound abyss of human history, a solitary soul might summon the fortitude to heed the call of their own conscience, no matter the terrible price. But perhaps the most spectral element of this tale is the profound silence that descended in its wake, the chilling efficiency with which the truth was interred. The absolute mastery of the narrative by those who stayed. It stands as a grim monument to all the similar chronicles swallowed by the mists of time, compelling us to question just how many other rebellions, both grand and quiet, were never etched into the record, their memory left to fade into oblivion. Ultimately, what we can grasp of Elizabeth and Catherine Caldwell, of Samuel and Elijah, reaches us as mere spectral fragments, tattered diary pages, faded letters, cold, official ledgers that mark their birth but conceal their lives, census notations that prove their corporeal form, yet betray nothing of the dreams that haunted their sleep. We are left only to conjure the sheer audacity it required to vanish into the darkness, forsaking all that was known for the phantom promise of a life of truth. The grand plantation house of their youth is now but a ghost. The very fields where Samuel and Elijah toiled under a merciless sun have been reshaped by the relentless march of time. All that endures is the narrative itself, enshrined not in stone or brass, but within dusty archives and the fading memories of generations, a faint whisper from the sepulchre of the past. It persists in posing its disquieting questions to our own time. As for the fabled wooden box, the vessel for those crude marriage papers, the tangible proof of that forbidden covenant, sealed on a March night in 1847, its final resting place, is a mystery lost to the ages. Some scholars surmise that Edward Caldwell cast it into the fire before his own demise, forever unable to face the damning truth it held. Others whisper that it might yet survive, secreted away in some forgotten repository, patiently awaiting the day it might be unearthed once more. Much like the very secret it guards, the hunt for that truth endures. A quest not merely for academics, but for any soul who dares to confront the tangled, shadowed roots of our collective past. And within that search, the chronicle of the Caldwell sisters stands as a stark admonition that history is not a mere ledger of decrees and battles and the deeds of powerful men, but is also woven from the threads of individual hearts and minds, from quiet acts of defiance that can irrevocably alter the course of fate. Then, in 1966, a most astonishing artifact emerged from the dust of an estate auction in Philadelphia, a small, leather-bound journal, scarred by water, yet mostly decipherable. was found lurking within the false bottom of a time-worn secretary desk. This diary belonged to none other than Samuel Johnson, the man once known only as Samuel of the Caldwell plantation, and its pages chronicled the years from 1848 to 1859. This unearthing offered the very first testament penned by one of the men who had vanished into the night. Samuel's own words, "Risen from the grave." The journal, a relic of a desperate past, divulged secrets long since buried about the escape and its chilling execution. He chronicled the painstaking preparations, however long, shadowed months. They had hoarded supplies, pored over clandestine maps, and etched the labyrinthine routes of the Underground Railroad into their very souls. Most hauntingly, he painted a grim tableau of their northward flight, a harrowing 6-week ordeal spent cloaked in the abyss of night, seeking refuge in shadows as the sun reigned. Their survival hanging by the thread of a hidden network of souls who risked everything to offer them sanctuary. A single entry, penned on the 2nd of April, 1847, recounts a moment where their world nearly shattered. "Today, we nearly met with disaster. A patrol halted the very wagon that concealed us, buried as we were beneath coarse sacks of grain." Elizabeth, despite the terror coiling in her heart, addressed the patrolman with an unnerving conviction. Weaving a tale of visiting kin in the adjacent county, her voice, a steady anchor in a sea of fear, never faltered. Though I could feel Catherine's tremors beside me in our suffocating haven, when the patrol at last moved on, we dared not draw breath for what felt like an eternity. Samuel's writings also offered a window into the maelstrom of emotions he endured during the escape and in its wake. He confessed a gnawing guilt for the family members left shackled to the Caldwell plantation, a profound disorientation in his newfound freedom, and the ceaseless, nagging vigilance required to guard their fragile safety in Philadelphia. Particularly heartrending were his reflections on his spectral bond with Catherine. In one entry from 1852, he confided, "She sometimes speaks of what she forsook to be with me. I remind her that I comprehend her sacrifice with a painful clarity, perhaps more so than she herself does. There are days I observe her gaze lingering on women in their fine silks from our window, and I wonder if she mourns her choice. Then she turns, and in the depths of her eyes, I see that same unyielding resolve that chose this life, this liberty, this love, however fractured and imperfect it may be." The diary also disclosed a startling truth, that the lines of communication with their forsaken home had not been entirely severed. Samuel detailed a clandestine correspondence between Catherine and one Margaret Sullivan, the very same housekeeper who had noted the twins' strange bond in a letter to her sister. Margaret, who had since relocated to Richmond following the death of Thomas Caldwell, served as a discreet conduit of information, a whisper from the world of Georgia and the grim aftermath of the twins' vanishing. Through these shrouded letters, Catherine learned of her own father's demise and of her uncle's ascension to power over the plantation. It was this dark knowledge that would eventually compel her fateful pilgrimage back to Georgia in 1865, a decision Samuel damned as foolhardy, yet conceded was necessary for her own peace of mind. His entry, penned after her return, is heavy with gloom, suggesting the confrontation with Edward Caldwell failed to grant the absolution Catherine so desperately sought. She returned more haunted than when she departed, shouldering the crushing weight of her father's final days. The knowledge that he died, believing she had been stolen away, perhaps even murdered, now plagues her spirit in a way my words cannot mend. Then, in 1967, another crucial fragment of this fractured history was unearthed. as researchers discovered the decaying church records of a small African Methodist Episcopal congregation in Philadelphia. These time-worn documents chronicled the baptisms of the Johnson and Davis children, with the names of their godparents inscribed for posterity. Remarkably, Elizabeth served as godmother to Catherine's firstborn son, while Catherine, in turn, stood as godmother to Elizabeth's own child, daughter, a testament to the enduring bond between the sisters. A fragile light against the shadows of their new existence, these chronicles also unearthed a pattern of restless movement, as both families flitted between Philadelphia and Boston, driven by the ever-present threat of the Fugitive Slave Act and the chilling specter of recapture. The very frequency of these relocations, a frantic dance every 2 years, speaks volumes of the persistent dread that must have poisoned the very air they breathed during this harrowing period. By 1855, as the city's ledgers and directories attest, Samuel Johnson had managed to carve out a modest but thriving livery business. Nestled within one of Philadelphia's crowded immigrant enclaves, this fragile enterprise provided just enough to secure a small home, a sanctuary that was nothing short of miraculous, given the dire circumstances of their arrival in the city only 8 years earlier. Meanwhile, Elijah and Elizabeth had withdrawn from the bustle of Boston, seeking refuge in a quiet farming community in western Massachusetts by 1854. There, local records show Elijah toiled as a carpenter and maker of cabinets, while Elizabeth eked out a supplemental income, sharing the knowledge of reading and sums with the local children. One can only surmise that their isolation in this pastoral landscape offered another veil of security, shrouding them from the intense scrutiny they would have surely endured in a sprawling city. Yet, perhaps the most startling discovery of all emerged in 1968, when a researcher, deep within the records of abolitionist societies, unearthed the names Catherine Johnson and Elizabeth Davis, listed as contributors to several fervent anti-slavery publications. Under the cloak of assumed names, the sisters had crafted a series of anonymous letters, detailing the profound moral decay of the slave system from the chilling perspective of those who had been raised within its very heart. These dispatches, published in The Liberator and other abolitionist papers, appearing between 1852 and 1858, never once betrayed their authors' true identities or harrowing circumstances, but instead spoke with a terrible power of the psychological torment inflicted by human bondage, a poison that scarred not only the enslaved, but also the enslavers themselves. In one such missive, attributed to the hand of Elizabeth, the author depicted slavery as a poison that rots the soul of the master as surely as it breaks the body of the slave, a vile system that renders all true human connection impossible across the unnatural boundaries it erects. The coming of the Civil War would bring with it new trials and faint opportunities for both families. Within the pages of Samuel's journal, entries from 1861 through 1865 reveal a man wrestling with both profound hope and abject fear over the conflict's uncertain end. He wrote of dispatching funds to support the Union cause and of attending hushed meetings where news from the battlefront was devoured, and of his community's collective terror at what a Confederate victory would mean for the so-called free people of the North. One particularly soul-stirring entry, dated January 1863, following the Emancipation Proclamation, reads, "Today marks the dawn of that which we have dreamed of for an eternity. Though the proclamation's practical reach may be limited, its moral significance is a thing of monumental weight. For the first time, this nation has been forced to declare what we have always known in our bones to be true, that no man possesses the right to own another. E and I observed this moment in quiet reverence, unable to give voice to the meaning of this day for us, who have known life on both sides of this terrible divide. The era that followed the war brought a fragile security, as the legal abolition of servitude removed the most immediate shadow from their lives. However, the cold ink of census records and other brittle documents from this period, whispers of lives still lived in caution, never fully emerging from the shade to reveal their true origins. Even as the spectre of recapture receded, in 1873, a cruel tragedy befell the Johnson family, when Samuel was taken by a sudden fever of the lungs at approximately 50 years of age. His death certificate, unearthed from Philadelphia's city archives, lists his trade as a business owner and his race, with no earthly hint of the extraordinary labyrinthine journey his life had been. Catherine would never remarry. City directories chart her course as she continued to command the livery business with the aid of her eldest son until 1881, when she sold the enterprise and retreated to the home of her daughter in the quiet of upstate New York. She passed from this world there in 1890 at some 65 years of age. Elizabeth, however, outlived her sister by nearly a decade, breathing her last in 1900 at her farm in Massachusetts, encircled by her children and their own, according to family letters passed down like heirlooms. In her final years, she would occasionally share fragmented stories of her youth in Georgia, though always carefully curated to excise the most perilous details of her escape and new identity. One of the most haunting artifacts to emerge from this long-buried history was a letter penned by Elizabeth for her granddaughter upon the occasion of the young woman's 18th birthday in 1895. In this missive, preserved by her kin and later entrusted to the Massachusetts Historical Society, Elizabeth offered guidance drawn from the crucible of her own astonishing experiences, though still veiled in secrecy. "My dearest girl," she wrote, "as you stand at the threshold of womanhood, I wish to impart the most valuable lesson my long life has taught me, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the resolve to act in defiance of it. Moments will arise in your life when you must choose between the expected path and the righteous one, between the comfortable lie and the difficult truth. In those moments, remember that the most arduous choice often leads to the most profound freedom. I have known both captivity and liberty in this life, though perhaps not in the manner you might imagine, and I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that no comfort is worth the price of a compromised soul." Yet the historical record remains a frustratingly fractured mosaic regarding the saga of the Caldwell twins. No photograph, no true likeness of the sisters has ever been found, though a haunting daguerreotype, believed to be of Samuel and Catherine's eldest son, taken in Philadelphia around 1870, rests in the collection of the Georgia Historical Society. The young man in the portrait bears a chilling resemblance to descriptions of Thomas Caldwell, from accounts of the day, a genetic phantom from a complex and tormented family history. In 1969, an archaeological dig at the desolate former site of the Caldwell plantation disturbed the very foundations of the slave quarters, recovering several artifacts, among them a small, carved wooden bird that, according to the faded script in Catherine's diary, was a secret gift from Samuel. This one tangible link to their forbidden love now lies in a museum collection, a silent witness to a bond that defied the brutal boundaries of its time. The spectral story of the Caldwell twins has gone on to inspire numerous academic papers, several historical novels, and at least a solitary stage play. Yet, it lingers in the shadows, a tale largely unknown beyond the hallowed halls of academia. Perhaps its obscurity is a consequence of the unsettling truths it exhumes. unsettling the comfortable fictions woven around the antebellum South, tearing at the gauzy veil of benevolent plantation myths and exposing the North's own fragile assumptions of a clear moral divide. But what truly sets the Caldwell affair apart, what makes it so uniquely haunting, is not the mere existence of a forbidden bond across the color line. Such alliances, whispered of in hushed tones, were far more prevalent than the official record would ever concede. Though most were born of a master's power over an enslaved woman, a grim tableau of coercion, not of consent. No. The chilling significance of this case is etched in the documents that chronicle the story of white Southern women who dared not only to harbor affection for enslaved men, but to act upon that love in the most unthinkable manner, imaginable, casting aside their gilded cages and vanishing into the night with their chosen companions. In 1968, from within the fading echoes of an oral history project, a voice emerged, a great-granddaughter of Elizabeth and Elijah Davis, musing on the spectral legacy of her kin. "When I contemplate the abyss they faced," she said, "the sheer scale of what they risked, not merely comfort or station, but their very lives, for a forbidden love and a truth they held sacred. It is a humbling thought. They possessed the audacity to gaze upon the world that forged them and declare, 'No, this is a profound wrong, and I will have no part in it,' even as that single act of defiance threatened to cost them nearly everything they had ever known. That is a form of moral fortitude, seldom witnessed in any age. The saga of the Caldwell twins now haunts that liminal realm, suspended between the cold ink of documented history and the ghostly breath of legend. The core truths that Elizabeth and Catherine Caldwell vanished from their father's sprawling plantation in the bleak March of 1847, accompanied by two enslaved men, that they materialized again in the North, shrouded in new identities and cloistered within new families, that Catherine, a ghost from the past, ventured back to Georgia after the ravages of the Civil War. These are the bones of the story, supported by a skeleton of documentary proof, yet the flesh, the vital details, remains maddeningly elusive, surviving only in tattered diary fragments, in letters torn and incomplete, in the fading whispers of memory passed from one generation to the next. Like so many tales of defiance against the institution of slavery, especially those authored by women, the complete truth lies veiled, obscured by the relentless march of time, by a conspiracy of silence, and by a historical record that was so often blind to the lives of those who dared to defy its brutal conventions. Then, in 2002, a final, startling discovery added another chilling layer to the enigma. During the restoration of an old Philadelphia boarding house, a known sanctuary for fugitives on the Underground Railroad, workmen unearthed a small, secret hollow within a chimney, and from it they pulled a small cloth pouch. Within lay a golden locket, holding two miniature portraits, their faces believed to be those of the Caldwell twins in their youth, accompanied by a folded slip of paper bearing the names Elizabeth and Catherine, Georgia, 1844. Scholars who have since scrutinized this relic believe it may have been intentionally concealed, a secret left behind by Catherine before her perilous return to Georgia in 1865, perhaps as a final testament against the dreadful possibility that she might never escape that haunted land again. If this theory holds true, the locket becomes a profoundly poignant testament to the mortal dangers she still faced, even with slavery legally abolished. In daring to confront the ghosts of her past, the portraits themselves reveal two young women, identical with their heart-shaped faces and somber, unsmiling eyes, adorned in the fine fashion of privileged Southern belles of the 1840s. Nothing in these placid, conventional images could ever betray the extraordinary rebellion that smoldered within their hearts. Women would forge a mere 3 years later decisions that would compel them to forsake the gilded world, these portraits entombed, and to embrace destinies they could scarcely fathom in the moment their likenesses were captured. Now, in our time, the bloodline of the Caldwell twins and of Samuel and Elijah flows scattered across the United States. Many souls oblivious to their bond with this haunting chronicle. Those who carry the knowledge of their ancestry speak in hushed tones of the tangled legacy it bequeaths, of the profound moral fortitude their forebears displayed, yet also of the shadowed truth that the Caldwell twins were at once inheritors of and insurgents against a system steeped in profound injustice. The very earth of the former Caldwell plantation has been transfigured by the relentless march of time, with sterile suburban homes now rising where fields of cotton once bled white. A small, forgotten historical marker, worn by decades of unforgiving sun and weeping rain, whispers nothing of the human tragedy that once unfolded upon this soil. Visitors to the area would never suspect that this mundane crossroads was once the stage for a breathtaking act of defiance against the bedrock institution of its era. And perhaps this very invisibility is a fitting epitaph. For the saga of the Caldwell twins is, at its core, a tale of the unseen threads that bind human souls across the cruel, artificial chasms of society. It is a story of silent rebellions, the kind that so often vanish, unrecorded, into the mists of time, of the audacity to envision a different kind of existence than the one prescribed by a merciless society. In the final, trembling entry in her diary, penned on the eve of her flight, Catherine Caldwell confided, "Tomorrow, we step into the abyss, ignorant of whether we shall find light on the other side. But even the deepest darkness of the unknown is a mercy compared to the false, glaring brightness of a life built upon the suffering of others. Whatever may come, we have chosen this path ourselves, perhaps the first truly free choice of our entire lives. That singular choice, sealed on a cold March night in 1847 by 2 daughters of privilege and 2 men in bondage, still sends its echo shivering through time. It stands as a testament to the power of a single conscience against the crushing weight of a society, and to the human spirit's capacity for a moral awakening, even in the most desolate of circumstances. Yet, the sound of that echo grows fainter with each passing year, as the voices of those who remember this story firsthand fall silent, as ink fades on yellowed, crumbling parchment, as the physical vestiges of the Caldwell plantation dissolve back into the unforgiving Georgia soil. And yet, it persists, a whisper from a bygone era that still possesses the power to unsettle and to inspire, compelling us to turn a scrutinizing gaze upon our own lives, our own shadowed compromises, our own courage, or lack thereof, when we stand in the face of injustice. In this light, perhaps the tale of the Caldwell twins is not truly a story of the past at all, but a dark mirror reflecting our present and our future. It is about the choices we are making now, the boundaries we consent to or tear down, and the very world we choose to erect or to preserve. Their true legacy is not carved in stone monuments or etched on markers, but lives on in the ceaseless human struggle to see and to honor the soul in ourselves and in others, no matter the terrible cost. And so the chronicle concludes, where it began, with 4 young souls stepping into the enveloping darkness of a Georgia night, casting behind them everything they had ever known for the spectral promise of freedom. We know now that they found their path to that freedom, however flawed and imperfect it may have been, But what we can never truly fathom is the sheer, terrifying courage it took to take that first step, to turn their backs upon the only world that had ever held them, choosing a phantom future over a corrupt and gilded present. In that single, suspended moment in that single choice, the very soul of their story is laid bare. A decision that reverberates through the ages, forcing us to confront what we would be willing to forfeit for passion, for retribution, for the singular chance to live by our own moral compass instead of the judgment of the world. This is a riddle without a facile answer, but one that haunts us as we stumble through our own benighted paths, grasping for the dawn,